Yeah, it's we had some other folks up here and they were just talking about how grueling
Yes.
campaigning
Yes.
can be.
It's a sprint.
Yeah. So how long have you been campaigning?
Probably, well, so realistically about 8 weeks, but I joke and say 8 years because I've been trying to be active in the community and, I've run before and I've just tried to stay engaged and, so that when I am running now, it's not as big of a lift.
Right.
Because I've been trying to maintain those relationships.
Yeah. It's like you have the muscle.
Yes.
Memory to get it done. Yeah. Well, I definitely admire you because we were just talking and you just said, yeah, I just want to go home. And and I can relate to that so much. Like, I travel sometimes when I work and it's like the jet lag and then especially when you're on like different time zones than your kids. Yeah. You just feel, I don't know. It's a feeling on the inside that I can't really describe.
Yes.
When you
it's
have
like a
to
little
be
disconnected, but
for
a short period of time. So.
Yeah. How many children do you have?
I have 2 kids of my own.
Okay.
They are almost 6 and 7.
Okay.
And then I have 2 stepkids who are 20 and 23.
Okay. That's a fun age, 6 and 7.
Yeah.
And 20 and 23 is awesome. I've been all of those ages. So yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yes.
I noticed when I was looking at your social media that you seem very women-centric.
Yes, yeah, I think that's accurate.
As a judge, and you talk a little bit about, a lot about just sort of, the things that you experience as a working woman. I think a judge I think everyone's work is valid. I think that being a judge, in your position with young kids and everything, it must be really, an interesting spot to be in and really hard sometimes.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, you want someone on the other side of the bench who can relate. I think being a woman helps, being a mom helps, being a person of color helps. So that, I think of if my kid ever found themselves in a courtroom, who would I want to be on the other side of the bench making tough calls in their life, right?
Yeah.
And I would want a woman and a mom and, someone with some experience.
Right. Do you know what the percentage is of like women who are judges? Even if you don't, do you know like nationwide what that percentage is, or even like in Columbus? Because I feel like that's important to know.
Yes. Well, in Ohio, less than 1/3 of our judges are women.
Really?
Yes. So
do you know how many judges, like ballpark, that there are in the state of Ohio?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I know in Franklin County, we've got 17 common pleas judges, I think 6 appellate court judges, and maybe 7 domestic court judges.
Okay.
And then maybe 17 municipal court judges.
Okay.
And Cuyahoga has a little bit more than that. So, we're talking several hundred, across the state.
But it's a pretty small percentage.
Yeah. A small number are women and even smaller number are minorities.
I can guess why there's not that many minority judges. Also, why there aren't that many judges. But like from your perspective and opinion, why the such low numbers?
Well, I think sometimes we have to, and what I hope that this campaign is doing is creating a path for women and minorities to see that it can be done. I think the law for a long time was a white male's profession. I think over time we're doing better. I think a couple years ago it started to be that more women were in law school than men. So I think, the shift is happening.
Yeah.
But then as you get into the actually working as an attorney and practicing and making your way up, a lot of women have kids, and then those interests start to compete.
Yeah.
There might not be the flexibility that someone wants. So I'm not sure, but I know, there's lots of good role models for me in Franklin County, and I hope to be a role model for others to encourage them to kind of go for it if they feel that that's their calling.
Yeah, I saw Ruth Bader Ginsburg on your page too.
Yes,
so it sounds like you have some big role models.
Yes.
As well. So I didn't introduce you. I always do this It's just my personality. I just go straight into the conversation and
I like
forget
it.
to tell our listeners who's talking. We have Stephanie Hanna here. She's running for judge, Franklin County Court of Common Pleas General Division.
Yes.
So welcome. We're so excited to talk to you. This is an important position that's up, and we want to make sure that the people know what it means and who you are. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I agree. I think more people should be aware of their judges and what's on the ballot and, be ready to show up.
Absolutely. So I always start off my interviews. I want to hear about you, your journey to becoming an attorney, just a little bit about your life, whatever you want to share with the people that you feel like, is relevant.
Sure. So I'm an Egyptian American. My parents are Egyptian immigrants, and I grew up in Michigan.
Okay.
And I went to Michigan State for undergrad and Toledo for law school. One thing that I remember from my childhood is being the only. I knew I wasn't white. I knew I wasn't black, but I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me. It's almost like brown wasn't a thing, right? It wasn't like a very common phrase 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Right.
So I definitely remember that feeling of being the only. And that kind of stuck with me. I moved to Columbus in 2008 after I graduated law school and knew I wanted to be in the courthouse. And knew I wanted to be in the courtroom. And so I did mock trial team in law school. And when I graduated, I got a job at the Columbus City Prosecutor's Office.
Okay.
And 2008, if you guys remember, was a time where the market was crashing.
Yeah, I remember. I was looking for a job then.
Yes, and jobs were hard to come by.
Or on my way. I was on my way to start looking for jobs. Yes.
Yes. And so, one thing looking back that was really cool about that time was it taught me a lot about perseverance because it took me a while to find a job. And then the first couple job opportunities that I had, they were very short because I worked for the government, and the government was eliminating positions. Right. Left and right, like a way we had never really seen before in our generation. So I had a couple of short-term jobs as prosecutor, one for the city of Columbus, one for the city of Lancaster. And then I ended up in the city of Tiffin prosecuting cases up there. And at the time, it felt like a blow because I was not able to be a prosecutor here the way I wanted to. But it turned out to be for the better because I got so much trial experience up there.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I was able to try cases, jury trials from beginning to end, and got a lot of experience for someone being so new out of law school. Okay. And it definitely confirmed for me that I wanted to be a judge. Okay. And that was kind of one of the goals I had.
Yeah. What specifically about that experience, like trying cases and all that goes into that, made you say, like, yes, being a judge is in my future, it's something that I want to do?
Yes. I saw how judges helped people in a way that was different from anyone else in the courtroom. Okay. And then I also saw what I would say are good judges and not so good judges, and the way that they talked to the people in their courtroom, the way that they ran their courtroom, the compassion that they brought, the energy that they brought. And there were judges who kind of did the job and went home, right? They ruled on their cases, went home. And then there were judges who cared and who were active in the community and did things to engage the community and serve the community outside of the courtroom. And after I observed that, I just knew that that was the kind of judge I wanted to be, and that this was, on my to-do list.
And I'll tell you, as someone, I'm from a small town where everybody knows each other. And, when people would unfortunately get into legal trouble or any potential legal trouble, there's always a conversation of oh, you don't want to get that judge.
Yes.
Because that judge they're mean, they're disrespectful, they don't care. Yeah. And I just always have thought it's interesting that it's generally the same people.
Yeah.
And from what you're saying is like, yes, like you have the opportunity to shape how you're perceived as a judge and how you show up for people is what I feel like I hear you saying.
Yes, absolutely. And,
even though you're probably somebody's in front of you, probably like their worst moment,
right.
They don't have to necessarily perceive you as a person making it more horrible.
Yes, because that's the thing. The people coming before you, that is always going to be their worst moment, right? And you as the judge, you have to show up like with your A game, because this is not your worst moment, right? And so you have to be there for the people who are coming before you where it is their worst moment. And that's part of the job, in my opinion.
Yeah.
One of the judges that I admire at the courthouse, I heard him say that you have to show up every day with your A game. And I thought, yeah, that's really accurate, because you have to be there for people when they're at their worst.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it. And I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into it, I got to ask the first hard question.
Yes.
And this is maybe not hard. It sounds hard. So at one point you were Republican.
Yes.
And you changed your party to Democrat.
Yes.
Walk me through your decision to do that.
Yes. Okay. I love this question because I feel like this transparency is so important. So I was working for a Republican endorsed judge in Franklin County in 2010.
Okay.
And there was something called the Columbus Bar Association Board of Governors. There was an election for lawyers, and I ran in that election. It's just among lawyers, but I campaigned really hard.
Okay.
And I caught the attention of a lawyer who was the chair of the Franklin County Republican Party.
Okay.
And he said, "Hey, do you want to be a judge one day?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, well, we're going to keep you in mind." And I said, "Okay." And I think big picture, if we zoom out, we have to understand that you don't want your judges to be political, right? It's unfortunately the way that we elect judges here is by political party. People who are in the courtroom often, I think, will tell you that they don't know that judges are their political party other than they have to identify when they run on a ballot.
Okay.
Right? So judges are different than state representatives or people in Congress or people making policy where I think your ideology matters, right? Because that's the things that you're advocating for. Judges, on the other hand, you want them to be neutral and fair and impartial and apply the rule of law and not pay attention to politics. But the irony is that we elect judges, and the way that we elect them is through political party. So having said all that, the Republican Party said, "Hey, there's an open seat." This was 2016. An open seat means there's no incumbent. So I wasn't running against anybody to remove a sitting judge. It's an open seat. Do you want to run? I said, "Yeah, I do." So I ran in 2016. It was a close race, and I lost, but I had a really good experience. People were receptive. And the way that I campaign, I don't talk about politics. I don't talk about my opponent. I just kind of focus on my race and why I think I'm the best candidate and what I want to bring to the table.
Right.
So that was 16. So then fast forward to 20, excuse me, and there was another vacancy, and I was asked if I wanted to run for that vacancy. And I said, okay. And, in full transparency, that is one where 2020 was, an interesting time for a lot of reasons. But that is one where if I had a do-over, I don't think I would have run with a Republican endorsement in 20.
Why?
Because it was so out of alignment with my values, the top of the ticket. And while I still wholeheartedly believe that you do not want your judges to be political, I had 2 kids at that time. I didn't have any kids the first time I ran, other than my stepkids, but I had 2 kids of my own. I had a daughter, and it started to feel very misaligned.
Yeah.
And very not who I was and not the way that I wanted to show up. Regardless of how I ran my campaign, right? I'm still very proud of the campaign, but I think looking back, hindsight is 2020. I think that I know who I was, and I I don't think I showed up in a way that was misaligned, but I think what was happening around us, right, around me and around the campaign and the country, right, like that was tough. That was very not who I was.
Yeah.
Right? That was misaligned.
Yeah.
So after that race, I was like, nope, I can't do that anymore. I just need to start showing up. Like, I know judges aren't political, but also I need to be true to myself in a more public fashion.
Right, because a political party can, for better or for worse, because we're in this two-party system.
Yeah.
And there are other parties that exist, but for the purposes of like what most of us know, they are in fact a reflection of your values.
Absolutely.
Whether it shows up specifically in your work. So that's what I hear you saying is like it's the Democratic Party and their values are more why you changed your...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think I've always identified as a Democrat. I've always voted for Democrats. I have always...
So you said check my receipts, basically.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I've always operated in a way. I don't think there's anything you can find in my past, just in terms of who I've supported, organizations that I've gotten behind. I've marched in pride parades. I'm a proud LGBTQ plus ally. I am, very supportive of women's bodily autonomy. I've donated to Planned Parenthood. I mean, all these things that I've done in my past that have been true to my values, right, tend to line up with the Democratic Party.
Okay.
And so, I think that was just the misalignment. I think, sometimes when we kind of know better, we do better in the sense that now I kind of get it. I wanted to really fight the battle. Honestly, I did. That it doesn't matter for judges, right? Like I really wanted to like carry this torch, but the reality is that it does matter, and that people want to know.
Some hills we just don't need to die on.
Right.
So just a really, really big hill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so at the end of the day, I'm proud of the way that I've shown up for the community, regardless of party affiliation. But I did decide to switch, in right after the 2020 election, and just be more outwardly aligned with the way that I have operated inside.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your really in-depth answer there.
No problem.
Because, sometimes people come on the show, they give me a couple words. I'm like, I want a little bit more than that.
Yeah,
so I appreciate
absolutely
that answer.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the ballot. I know you had requested that the party not endorse a candidate. And an endorsement happened anyway.
Yes.
I want to talk about how you feel about, we talked a little bit about that, but like, how do you feel about the sample ballot? As someone who's run a few times and sort of experienced kind of what the sample ballot does or does not do.
Yeah. It's interesting. And so what I'm guessing you're referring to is what the Democratic Party puts out as the sample ballot.
Yeah.
And even today I was just thinking like the terminology, it's so funny. It's a variation of a ballot, right? It's not a sample of what you will find in there, right? It's the sample they would like
something
you.
Different. Yeah.
I know, but it's not you. That's kind of the terminology it's been, given over the years. I do think people, especially in a primary, are more willing to take a look at what's out there and make an informed choice because they know everyone on their ballot's a Democrat. So the sample ballot, I think, is much more effective in November, right? Where people are like, well, I don't want a Republican, so let me just use this name. But now that's not what they're deciphering, right? They're deciphering between two people of the same party. So it's uphill. I won't lie, right? I mean, it's uphill for sure.
Yeah.
But people have been very receptive and very willing to engage and listen and learn.
Okay. So I want to get into a lot of it about your campaign.
Yeah.
One thing I read was that you're hoping to establish a reentry court docket.
Yes.
I know a little bit about what that means, but it's not about what I know. It's what I want to make sure the listeners know. Can you talk about what that means and how it pertains to your plan if you are elected judge?
Yes. So a reentry docket is focused on people who are released from prison, granted judicial release, and they are reentering our society. So it helps with things that are traditionally hurdles for those folks. Housing, employment, getting a state ID, medication, mental health services, all of the things that maybe we take for granted that allow us to, live every day.
Yeah.
That's what a reentry docket focuses on. And it's a way for the court to get involved after you're sentenced. I definitely do not believe that the only role a judge should play is that we sentence you and then we hope you figure it out, right? I do think we have to be there on the other end to help you as you're being released. And we're the only large county in Ohio that doesn't have one. There are 10 of them right now in the state, and they're gaining traction. They definitely help reduce recidivism, especially among second-time offenders.
Yeah.
So right now, the data shows that over a third of people being released from prison will reoffend within the first 3 years. And so reentry dockets are important because not only are they helping that population, they're helping all of us, right? Because fewer crimes are occurring, right? And I have talked to so many restored citizens and people who have been released from prison, and their number one complaint is that, the reason if they reoffended, it's because they felt like nobody was there to help them with these really small things that they needed help with that would have gotten them over the hump. And then when you feel backed into a corner, you go back to what you know, right? And very rarely are people wanting to commit more crimes, right? They just feel like they have no other choice.
And I think sometimes we assume that folks have, family, a loving family, someone that's going to take them in on the other side. So I think that's a really amazing thing that you're focusing on. One thing I want to know is, like, with Columbus being such a progressive place, why isn't there if so many other places in Ohio have them, why don't we have one yet? Is it just kind of hard to get it started? You have to have a judge who is passionate about bringing it and then willing to do the work. Okay. I don't think anyone is against it, but I don't know that we have a champion for it. Okay. We have 2 specialty dockets in our common pleas court. Okay. And they're a lot of work. And so you have to have someone who, in addition to their own docket, wants to take on that.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. That's good context.
Yeah. And right now in Franklin County, there's 17 common pleas judges in the general division, and each one has about 700 cases on their docket. Okay. So it's a very busy place.
So if they have 700 cases on their original docket and then there's another docket on top of that, is that like double the number?
No.
Or is it just the people that you have come through your courtroom?
Well, other judges can refer people to the reentry docket, but the numbers would not be that high because you would have to screen people. They'd have to be a good match. They'd have to want to participate. It would typically be a 12 to 18 month program where they have to come to the courthouse 2 times a month to check in and have a meeting and go through the program, get additional services. So it's a commitment. So you have to make sure that people are screened and that they want to be part of it. Right. So it wouldn't be double the number of cases, but it's probably close to double the work. Yeah. Because you're doing a separate docket that requires a lot, especially when you're getting it off the ground.
So it also sounds like you all would have to partner with some like community organizations and some other folks to create kind of like that pipeline through, so that there's some holistic care going on all the way around.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one thing that I've done,
services.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that I've done over the last, probably 7 or 8 years now is build relationships with nonprofits in the reentry space who are already doing this work, so that when this docket gets off the ground, everyone has already been vetted. We have our partners. We're able to bring them into the courthouse to talk with folks, to get the services that they need on site. That's really my vision, so that we're not having to make referrals and, hope you figure it out, hope you find the place, but we bring the place here. We bring representatives to the courthouse to make that initial interaction. To hopefully increase the chance that, you're following through with the appointment, you're getting the services that you need, and you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So you don't have to, if you are elected to this role, you don't have to go into these organizations and be like, hey, I'm Judge Hanna.
Right.
They're going to be like, we already know you and trust you.
Yes.
Because the trust piece is so big. It's like the biggest piece of getting anything done, in my opinion, is like having community trust.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you'll be able to hit the ground running with that piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. The trust, everyone would be vetted, which is the goal, to make sure that we know, there's alignment and we're all moving in the same direction.
Can you talk a little bit about something that I care a little more deeply about, something I care very deeply about, which is just the restorative justice piece.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the reentry court docket. Are there other ways that you would like that to show up in your work, and why you think it's important?
Yeah, I think that, judges play a huge role in restorative justice, right? They have the potential to impact someone's life for the better with every decision that they're making on each case. And so if we give people the tools that they need to succeed, I believe that they will succeed, right? But I think of the same thing when I punish my kids. If I'm punishing you and I'm just like sending you away, and then I'm not talking to you about it, and I'm not giving you the tools to do better next time, and I'm not telling you what you did wrong and how we're going to work together to fix it, so that you feel like it's me and you against the problem instead of me against you. That same principle, we're all humans. The same principles apply in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And to be clear, there are a small percentage of cases in common pleas court that are very egregious and people need to go to prison, right? That the law mandates it. So I'm committed to following the law. However, there is a much bigger segment where there's a lot of discretion.
Yeah.
And where even with prison, you can be offering additional services and additional ideas and ways for people to kind of get some of this holistic care that you're talking about. And especially in instances where jail is not mandatory, there are things that we can do, programs that exist in the community and in the courthouse, and other referrals that we can make to agency partners to help people get the tools that they need so that they aren't making the same mistakes over and over. I definitely do not believe in fear-based, punishment sort of a thing. We can just do better because we want better outcomes. So there's absolutely a place for prison and punishment, and we have to pay attention to victims of crime. And, this is not to downplay any of that, but this is to just pay attention to this notion that there are other things that we can do other than just locking people up and not giving them the tools that they need to succeed.
Yeah. When I think about how restorative justice can impact Black communities, communities of color, it would have a huge impact because people would be seen. I think that from a systemic standpoint, there are reasons why, from a systemic standpoint, people feel like they need to commit a crime of survival, things like that. I wanted to talk to you about how you feel like systemic racism shows up in the justice system, and how it shows up in sentencing, and how you hope to grapple with that as a judge.
So I think for sure judges and the court need to have an active role in the role that we are playing in systemic racism. I don't think it's appropriate for judges or the court to kind of pull the blanket over their head and say like, oh, well, I'm fair and impartial, so I don't know what's going on out there. That's the prosecutor's problem. They're the one charging
Everybody has implicit bias.
Right.
Everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we have to pay attention to our implicit biases, right? And we have to know how they creep into our decision making and call ourselves out. And so I have been taking DEI training for years, and I'm always trying to get better and pay attention to where my biases creep in.
I was going to ask you that, like, how do you work on that just within your own self, knowing that it could show up in your work?
Absolutely. So I call myself out all the time when I'm thinking of something or making a judgment. It's funny, we're at this early vote center talking to voters, and even little things like if we see a certain type of car pull up, we're making a judgment about who is in that car. Is it someone that's going to want to talk to us or not want to talk to us? And so I'm hyper aware of that and try not to let that creep into decision making. There's also sentencing guidelines that judges have to follow. And the Supreme Court for the past handful of years has been collecting data on sentencing and
the Ohio Supreme Court.
Okay. Yes, on sentencing and the racial makeup of the people being sentenced.
Okay.
And I think paying attention to that, at least having access to that data, is the first step in the right direction, because I think sometimes it's hard for us, hard for judges, hard for the court to admit that it's happening, right? Or to admit that we're playing a role in it. So I think that being aware of it is huge. And then starting to make sure that you're consistent in sentencing, not only in your courtroom, but across the courthouse. Like, each courtroom shouldn't operate in such a silo with so much disparity. You mentioned, in a smaller town saying like, oh, you got a bad judge, or, oh, you're going to get sentenced so differently or so harshly. That shouldn't be the case, right? Like, we should be able to have consistency in sentencing across the board.
Yeah.
It's going to take time. But I think having that conversation, knowing that the court plays a part in it and actively trying to dismantle it, are steps in the right direction.
The 88 counties in Ohio?
Yes.
Do they all keep that type of like demographic data, or what? I'm curious about that.
No. So from what I understand, the Supreme Court of Ohio has been trying to collect that from each of the 88 counties.
Okay.
And some of the hurdles that they have run into, from my understanding, is that not all counties are accurately keeping some of this data. And so they have been compiling it and kind of, starting to put standards in place of data that courts have to start collecting.
Do you have any, if you're elected judge and other judges across Ohio, do you all have anything that you can do to make sure that that data starts to get collected, or people get a little more urgency around doing it the way that you think that it should be done in order to have it, to make some changes?
Yeah. I mean, I imagine that there will be a way.
Do you have like a judges coalition or something?
Yeah. So there is, there's probably things I'm not aware of, but I do know that there are a handful of committees and things, parts of the Supreme Court that have judges from all across the state on it, and, criminal justice committees and those sorts of things. So I would like to get more involved in those, if I'm elected, and start making sure that we're moving things in the right direction so that we can have that data and be able to assess where we are and come up with ways to improve.
Okay. Another question that I have is, what do you feel like are common misconceptions about like what a judge does or is supposed to be able to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll back up and I'll say this. So Common Pleas Court General Division hears felony cases.
Yeah, I meant to ask you that. Talk about Common Pleas Court General Division so that folks know what you're running for and what your purview will be.
Yes. So two main areas. So criminal, so that's felonies. So anything from a first degree felony up to a fifth degree felony.
Anything you're up shit creek for, basically.
Yes. Like the bad stuff.
Yeah.
And then civil cases where the amount that you're fighting over is over $15,000.
Okay.
And so most common types of those cases are like medical malpractice or contract disputes or construction cases, foreclosures.
So you could literally go from like murder to money in the same. Okay, got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
And most judges' dockets are split pretty evenly. About 350 cases are civil and 350 are criminal.
Okay.
And so that's kind of big picture, you know, the lay of what the courtroom looks like and what the caseload looks like. What was your initial question that got us here?
This is always people ask me that. I'm always like, what did I just ask you, Taijuan? Do you know? What? Oh, yes. Okay. Common misconceptions about being a judge or what you're able to do as a judge.
Yes.
So, but first, before we go back to that, I wanted to ask you, because you talked about like caseload and dockets. Would your purview be around the backlog of cases that I keep on hearing about? Would that have anything to do with like your particular division?
Yes. So
the backlog murder cases.
Right. So that's like a little different. So that's probably, that specifically is geared towards the prosecutor's office.
Okay.
But to be sure, there are cases in the court that have already been filed that need to be decided on, right? I mean, so it's the volume is high everywhere.
Okay.
So while we don't have like backlog murders per se, we definitely have cases that are old, right? That need to get moving.
Okay. So for the people who might get confused about that, when you say I would be covering felonies, but not necessarily like murders with the prosecutor's office, what's the difference? Like, what is the difference?
So the court hears murder cases, but what I think the kind of hot topic when, you know, because I've attended some of these prosecutor debates when they're talking about the backlog of murders, that's more before they are fully ready to go to trial. Like there's discovery issues or there's some other internal issues like that the prosecutor's office needs.
So you have nothing to do with that up until the point till it gets assigned to your courtroom.
Yes, till the case is actually filed, it passes a grand jury, and it comes to us.
Right. Okay.
So, but you know, because there are so many cases in common pleas court, there is a backlog of a different sense, right? Where we need to get decisions out in civil cases. We need to have trials in civil and criminal cases, and get things moving. So one of the things that I've done to increase efficiency is I implemented an online scheduling system.
Okay.
For our courtroom. I think we're the only courtroom in the courthouse, the courtroom where I work now. So I work as a staff attorney for a judge. Oddly enough, I work for my opponent in the 2016 race.
Okay.
Okay. So it's always been about the work. No, it's not awkward at all, because it's always been about the work.
Yeah.
And so we're the only courtroom that does online scheduling for civil cases. So what that does is it allows attorneys to schedule their time with the court without me or other court personnel using our time going back and forth over email. And that has been very efficient because it allows me to work on drafting decisions for the judge to review instead of scheduling with 4 lawyers on a case.
Okay. So you can already see that paying dividends in terms of time and the cases that are left on it. Okay. That's awesome.
And I think being strategic and sometimes creative in the way that you manage your caseload, in the way that you schedule cases, you know, can we try and put the same types of cases on one day? Can we try and put the same, you know, cases with the same issues grouped together? There's things that you can do on the back end that help things, you know, run more efficiently and help move things along. You know, another part of it is, you know, can you be accessible on the bench from 9 a.m. most days? You know, I think there's some judges who have reputations of, you know, being there, being available. That definitely helps get things moving. So those are all ways.
So you're saying you can set your own schedule?
Yes.
You don't have to be, didn't know that.
Yes. So
thanks for that.
Yeah. And you can set certain types of cases at certain times.
Okay.
You know, and so there's things that you can do where you can start to make sure that you have a little more control over the case flow, which can help with some of the backlog.
Okay. So back to the question that I remember now, which is, I feel like most of the people that come up here who are politicians have, and I don't always ask this question, but I just kind of know, because that's one of the reasons why we do this show, is to educate people.
Yeah.
Like, what do you feel like are misconceptions about what a judge does, can do? I'm interested to hear about that.
Yes. So I think that sometimes people think that judges, sit up there, they sit higher than everyone else in the room, they make a judgment, right? Make an assessment, and move on to the next case. And I think the reality is that judges lose sleep over these decisions. They know that people's lives are in their hands. They know that it's really serious.
Yeah.
I've worked in the courthouse for almost 10 years now for judges. And I can tell you that it is not, it's not glamorous. It's a lot of kind of isolation and long hours, and it's quiet, and you're reading a lot, and you're making decisions. I think sometimes when we're campaigning, we're out and we're doing fun stuff, and we're on podcasts, and, we get to do cool things, and people are, impressed to see us. But the reality is, if you get elected, it's like a lot of work, and it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of making important decisions, spending time in your chambers with cases, with pleadings, with letters from victims, with letters from the defendant's family, with all of these different things that you're grappling with. And it's also kind of isolating because you can't talk about these things, right, to anybody. Like, you have to keep them confidential. So I think that's one misconception. I think another misconception is that, judges are inaccessible, like the court and the community are far apart. That is one kind of myth and misconception that I really want to work on breaking down. I think the courthouse shouldn't be just a place that you think of when things are terrible, right? Like, it can be a place of hope and of smart second chances and of giving people the tools they need to succeed. And I think the court should be in the community, and the community should be in the court. And so that people know what's going on in there. Because, one of the things that I'm also really passionate about is this idea that representation on our bench matters. And so, as if I'm elected, I'd be the first Egyptian American judge in Franklin County, the second in the state of Ohio.
Wow.
And, we live in such a diverse community that I think you should be able to see that diversity on the bench, right? And along with that, you need to be able to see that diversity in the community, right? And so the judge needs to be active in the community, because the reason that this is important is because when some member of the community is before the court, there should be people who have relationships with the judge who are able to, advocate for their person, right? Their brother, their son, their sister, their daughter, with the court. And so that doesn't impact, you're still following the law, but it just adds an element of humanity to it.
Yeah.
Right. And lets there bridge the gap between the court and the community.
You're talking about the bench reflecting the community. What would be your part? Because it seems like you're a champion for wanting more diversity within the system. What do you feel like would be your part in trying to help make that happen? I know you've built a lot of relationships, but do you have other ideas about how you could help more folks become, either it's like some people just don't, I think, know what it takes to run.
Yeah.
Or even just rolling it back. What does it take to even think about becoming a judge? Because I would imagine some folks go into the law profession and that's not even something that they think about doing. Can you talk a little bit about if you have any plans on what that would look like for you to amplify other, diverse voices within the profession and bring other people in?
Yeah, so I have really strong relationships with the Arab American Bar Association of Ohio and the law student groups, the John Mercer Langston Bar Association, which is the African American Bar Association in Columbus, and the Black Law Student Associations at both of our local law schools. And I think that having those relationships are really helpful because I would love to offer trainings and workshops so that people can see the inner workings of what it takes to run for office. I think people love the legal aspect of being a judge, but I think the political aspect is a turnoff for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And they don't want to, put themselves out there, and they don't want to, be a politician, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And really breaking down some of those barriers and just, even if at the end of the day that someone still decides they don't want to do it, that's fine. But at least what it could look like. And then also pulling people up alongside you. I mean, I will say one thing that's very interesting in the political space is, you find out quickly who is like a true ally and who is kind of an ally in name only, and who's willing to put their neck on the line for you. And who isn't, and there's no right or wrong, and, everyone can operate the way that they want to operate, but it is just very telling when you're in the political landscape to see who shows up for you, and who has shown up for you time and time again. And I feel really fortunate to have a lot of people who have been with me, it's my third time running, right? They've been along from the beginning. And that feels really great. But being able to be that for someone else, and truly pulling as we climb.
I randomly had a friend who's an attorney here, and I called her and I said, I want you to tell me a little bit about, I'm interviewing Stephanie Hanna. And she said, she met with me when I moved back to Columbus and was just a young attorney and didn't know anybody. And I think that speaks a lot to, I always look at what people do, not what they say.
Yeah.
And I didn't ply her with any like answers or any leading questions, but that was the first thing that she said. So I wanted to mention that to you.
Cool. Thank you.
Like I said, I believe in what people do, not always what they say. Is there anything else that you want people to know about your campaign? You've run 3 times.
Yeah.
So to me, that shows that you really want this. It's something that you're really passionate about and believe that you are the right person for the job. So I won't even ask you that. I just want you to tell the people what you want them to know. It's kind of like a last piece.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think I have been a lawyer for the last 15 years. Most of that has been in public service. I've served as a prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, a civil litigation associate. I've had my own practice. I've served as a magistrate and as a staff attorney for several judges. I know the inner workings of this court. Most of my time practicing has been in this very court, of which I'm seeking election. And I am passionate about being able to think outside the box a little bit and not only do the job, but bring some new energy and really like reimagine reentry in Franklin County. We can be a leader in this space. I've had the passion for this work, for as long as I can remember. And I'm, ready to roll up in my sleeves and keep working, and keep fighting. And, with support of your listeners and, being able to share with a friend and tell someone that they heard this or that they met me, we can do that. And, I think that we, can just really transform what it means, to be, to not just to be a judge, but like what the courthouse can do for the community, and really just take it to the next level. In my race, I'm the only woman running. I'm the only minority. I'm the only person that can serve more than one term without being age limited out. And I think I'm the only person that can bring this relevant experience, compassion, and energy to get this done.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
It was so great to have a chance to meet you, and I'm excited for the community to listen and to learn more about you. Where should people go if they want to learn more about you and your campaign?
Yes.
You got an Instagram? Do you have a TikTok?
Yep.
Somebody came up here, has a TikTok now.
I know. I am not that fancy, but I haven't.
Going worldwide. So
I
yeah,
know.
where should people find you?
Yes. So the website is hannaforjudge.com.
Okay.
And Instagram is hannaforjudge2024. And then you can find me, Stephanie Hanna, on LinkedIn and Facebook. And Hanna for Judge also has a Facebook page.
Okay. And that's HANNA.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming up here on a Friday
Yes.
night. And I hope you get some rest.
Yes. Thank you.
At least for the night, because I know you got to get back out there tomorrow.
Yes.
So,
thanks for having me.
Of course.